Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we meet again on the air in this week's edition of Man and Nature on Radio IKIM. If we recall, last week we discussed the topic communicating climate science through poetry with Dr. Muhammad Istajib Mokhtar, Senior Lecturer, Department of Science and Technology Studies, Faculty of Science, University Malaya. It was an interesting discussion looking at how poetry can play its role in communicating climate science. In essence, poetry, as Dr. Istajib put it, is the best words in the best order. And as he pointed out, even from the history of the Islamic civilization, there were prominent scholars of science who were outstanding poets, such as Ibn Sina and Umar Khayyam. So, ladies and gentlemen, picking up on that point regarding history and relating this to our general theme of discussion in Man and Nature, this week we have with us Dr. Muhammad Husni bin Muhammad Amin, who is Fellow at the Centre for Science and Environment Studies, Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, IKIM. He has an engineering background from University Tenaga Nasional, Uni 10, before continuing his studies at the Masters and PhD levels at University Technology Malaysia, UTM. And our topic today is ethical failures and man-made disasters, which will shift the focus of our discussions before from natural disasters to man-made disasters. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Husni, and welcome to Man and Nature.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Dr. Sheikh, and it is good to be welcome here.
Glad to have with you in the studio today.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be interviewed by my recently former boss.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Husni, for gracing our program. Perhaps I think I'll pick up on the introduction that I mentioned earlier. Yeah. Your first training was engineering.
Yes.
And now you have made quite a shift. What made you become interested to study history?
Yeah, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you, Dr. Sheikh, for the question. I think it's got to do with the things that I've read during my youth and also after my first degree. That one of the authors that I've read was Professor Dr. Donald Routledge Hill. He wrote some books on Islamic technology, science and technology, Islamic engineering, Islamic fine technology. What in the Arabic it's known as Hiyal, combining mathematics, geometry with practical applications to overcome obstacles, to carry heavy materials, to make waterways, and also he co-authored books with the late Professor Ahmad Yusuf Al-Hassan, whom I think in 2001 visited Malaysia to present paper here next door in the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC. And they wrote books on that. So, but Dr. Donald Hill, he wrote his book Islamic Science and Engineering that was published in 1993. He said that, interestingly, that the expansion of Islam accompanied science and technological advancement, and it made Muslims the inheritors of 3,000-year-old tradition of building dams in rivers. And he said that not only the dams they constructed met the irrigational needs of great cities, such as in Baghdad and Samarkand, and also in Khurasan, but also in Cordoba in Muslim Spain. And these dams, relating to the topic of discussion today, they were important because they played a crucial role in preventing flood and also absorbing rainstorm water which occurred from time to time. So that made me very interested to look into the history besides other reasons as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So having listened to your answer, basically you're still in engineering, so to speak,
Yeah.
but more looking at engineering from the historical perspective.
Historical and also the philosophical aspect of technology.
Yes,
Yeah, the reason of why they built such a thing.
Which
Yeah.
brings us to our topic on ethical failures and man-made disasters.
Yes.
So I think the question that I'd like to pose to you now is that were there many man-made disasters in the past,
Yeah.
and did the people then manage to avert any of them?
Yeah. So so when we look at the sources of Islam, the Quran and the Hadith, we find that especially in the Quran, talking about some of these disasters were wrought by the hands of human beings themselves. It says Zuharul fasadu fil bahri wal bahr bima kasabat aydin nas. It says that this corruption has appeared in the lands and in the seas due to what men have wrought by their own hands, by him. So this is maybe alluding to the what men themselves have done. So those kind of disasters qualify as man-made disasters, and the most easy or spot on instances that we can find in the Quran, for example, the great ancient dam of Ma'rib in Hadramaut in Yemen, where it happened in the last quarter of the 6th century, meaning very close to the emergence of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Just before he was born, there happened the collapse of that great dam, which have stood there for centuries, and they were built by the Sabaeans, which also been mentioned in the Quran. They were the people of Queen Sheba, or the one who married Prophet Sulaiman sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this we can find in Surah Saba, verse 16. The verse states there, and according to the Mufassir Imam Fakhruddin Razi, in his Tafsir Al-Kabir, he stated that the reasons why the dam was destroyed because the Sabaeans, they have gone wayward, they've become corrupted, they have transgressed. And some other reasons that we find, Donald Hill said that it was because they had no technical or financial means to maintain the dam. So that's what happened. And these reasons, they are not mutually exclusive. They can be the same for the same reason. With advances in science and technology, you can see that the ethics and morality of people begin to decline, and then so you have corruption, you have financial type of corruption, you have moral corruption. For example, maybe they had financial corruption, as Donald Hill said. They didn't have the technical or the financial means to maintain the dam, and the morality part of it, because they saw none of it is their responsibility to maintain the dam. So in that respect, they failed to avert the disaster. But if you see in the Asian dams, for example, in Valencia and Mestalla, these the Muslims there, they built desilting sluices to prevent silt from collecting, therefore choking the waterways. So because of this innovation that the Muslims introduced, they can control the water more safely. Therefore, they managed to avert disasters such as great floods or what have you. So I think I think in recent times, dams still play the important role of preventing floods. If we see that for some reason, people fail to discharge their responsibilities, making sure that the waterways are not clogged by rubbish or silt, then some of disasters of our decades we might have been able to prevent them, or even minimize the consequences of any disaster. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So basically, you mentioned about corruption, transgression.
Yeah.
So these are basically ethical problems or
Yeah.
ethical failures. So how can ethical failures eventually lead to man-made disasters? I know you have given a few examples already.
Yeah.
But could you provide examples in history and contemporary times with regards
Yeah.
to this?
Yeah, thank you again, Dr. Shah. I think it's good when I was doing research for my master's thesis, I studied this a group of engineers, the Banu Musa brothers, and they were brought up in the palace, and that was during the time of Caliph Al Ma'mun, and that was in the year 830, and they grow up, and then they were under the caliph's patronage, and they had an outstanding career. They came up with this. They advanced the discipline of Hiyal, the fine technology, which I said that Donna Hill, described that they were doing. So at the peak of their career, this is the it recurs throughout history. When you are successful, and then you begin to some people, they begin to exhibit hubris, and then they had an outstanding career, and they received government contracts to build. For example, this Banu Musa particularly, they were assigned with building the township of they call it Ja'fariyah in the Tigris riverbank in Samarra in Iraq. This one is to perhaps match the success in Baghdad, or to replicate it. But in their hubris, they contracted somebody else to work under them, and without due diligence. Somebody by the name of Ahmad al-Farghani, whom the historians take note that even though he was quite known to be a very knowledgeable astronomer, or even a mathematician, he, as an engineer, he was not quite successful in bringing many of his projects into completion. And because of this failure in due diligence on the part of Banu Musa, he made an error in erecting the nilometer. This nilometer, the purpose of this nilometer is to measure when River Tigris will be rising up. There's supposedly a low tide and high tide with the Tigris River, and they were supposed to divert this river so as not to flood the new township site, but to divert the water so that it can water the floodplains. And during that time, floodplains very precious because it provided the strategic places to grow crops. And if your agriculture industry is thriving, therefore you can produce food, so it will become strong as a civilization, and you can feed people easily. But because of this failure to calculate the degree, the angle of the nilometer properly, so they made an error. He made a gross error in calculations, so the leveling was not correct, and time came when the river tide rose and flooded the whole construction program. For this reason, the township only survived only in name in the history books, and you can find it in the geographical locations. So as a result of this ethical failure, and when we talk about ethical failure, when we talk about corruption, there is a corruption of the omission kind, where a person commits bribery, gives something, or the corruption of just now I mentioned commission, right? The other one is omission. When you are tasked with something, you are made responsible for a duty or a task or an assignment, and you didn't do it. That's a kind of moral failing or an ethical failure. So in the case of Banu Musa, they failed to ensure the proper due diligence when it comes to discharging their duties properly. And so this is a testament that every unethical practice contains a potential disaster. And the second part of your question, when you ask me, in contemporary times, I think the one is the one that immediately comes into my memory was the collapse of the Sampung department store. It was the largest superstore in Seoul, in South Korea, prior to the September 11 in 2001, and it was the largest because it left 502 people dead, and almost 1,000, about 937 people, civilians, got injured. So it was stated that as the largest peacetime disaster until September 11 happened. And if you go by, I think there was one of the cable TVs that showed the failure of these mega structures. They flesh out. I mean, describe the investigation of the whole disaster, that they found the engineers, upon the request of some of the building owners or the project owners, to reduce the materials used for the supporting columns of that building. So when they added on top of that building, they added on some heavy machineries. I think it was air compressors, and it went beyond the tolerance of the building. So that initiated the collapse of the structure.
So the integrity of the building was compromised.
Yes, indeed. Exactly that was happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I would imagine most of our listeners may not remember that.
Yeah, it was a long
incident.
time ago.
It was in the late 90s. If
Yeah,
I'm not wrong.
95
Yes.
to be exact.
Okay. Right. Dr. Hussein, I think you have highlighted the importance of ethics, especially in terms of averting man-made disasters.
Yeah.
So what can we do to improve ethical content of education, in particular in the technical and also managerial fields?
Yeah. So lest we condemn history, what's happened in the past, I think we should remember that even today we still have that potential failures. I think due to the separation that we have when we teach STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and we fail to ensure that the whole syllabus is infused, or at least has elements of that teach ethics and morality. I think this happen when you have separation of science technology from the realm of worldview, of ethics, and society. And why do I say worldview is because of the speculative nature of ethics, that it needs to evolve with culture. Therefore, this kind of ethics, it is derived out of philosophical speculation. So because of that, they will happen. You see that as with regard to culture, some culture where giving money is not bribe. Some culture is not. It is unforgivable or unpardonable offense. But some people will try to. You can find that in history, some people try to really justify what they are doing, and because of that, ethics needs to be grounded in worldview, in absolute terms, and because of this, studying the past independently from worldview and epistemic framework of the scientists and technologies, this will result in what we call knowledge compartmentalization. That you see, we become our specialization become too blinkered that people in, say, the science stream or engineering field, they see no connection with the arts or morality or religion. And when you try to introduce the subject, they will see what it's got to do with me. I'm studying pure religion. But clearly, when we see into the history, you find, you know, things like Banu Musa, you know, Sampung, where these people look, for example, Banu Musa, they had such a rivalry with Al-Kindi. They caused him to be slandered, and because of that he lost, you know, his reputation was damaged, and he had his personal library, the Kindiyah, was taken away from him on account of some intrigue that the Banu Musa started. And because of that, because we don't know Banu Musa to be such a moralist figure, they were purely brought up in the sciences, and that's the time when the translation movement was fast going. The translation movement that was commissioned by Khalifah Al-Ma'mun, and that's the time when philosophy began to flourish in the society, and they begin to they mistook some of the Greek moral concepts, and they try to, well, we can say that they try to Islamize some of these concepts, to cast it into the crucible of Islamic framework. But it was only successful to a certain level. But something must have happened there that shifted their value system there. So I think what can be done, as per your question, Dr. Sheikh, I think we need to enrich further our education in this respect. I mean, previously we had Titas teaching civilization, we had ethics and morality, and this is also some of my findings when I was doing my research. For example, in 2017, the Institute of Integrity Malaysia, they came up with a survey. They found out that out of a few thousand university students that they were surveying, they found that a staggering 35% of the students, or one in three university students, did not regard bribery as corruption, and that was in 2017. So you just imagine if they were in year one then. Now it's already 2023. More than 5 years have elapsed. So now they are working in the job market. They are working. So imagine if these people, they didn't think that if their worldview isn't corrected, their ethics, they didn't learn anything about ethics and morality. They are still thinking in these terms. They still think that bribery is not corruption. And as we see in history, as I've mentioned, this is it's a ticking time bomb. It's just waiting, a disaster waiting to happen, a man-made disaster. Yes.
Scary thought.
Yeah, it's scary thought indeed.
Okay, Dr. Husni, perhaps you have some concluding remarks to our topic today?
Yeah, so the scientists, they say that today the world is experiencing what they call to be the Anthropocene, the period where human activities cause the most impacts on the geology, earth geology and ecosystem. This range from massive unsustainable lumbering activities, overdevelopment of our cities, and roads, they cannot hold precipitations, and we discovered this. I think it was on the news that they found out after 2021 flooding, was it? They found that all the drainage that have been clogged by rubbish, by trash. I mean, if you have a truly, now the buzzword is Madani, if you have truly a civil society, then you'd have a society that does not do these things. They know how to be responsible in taking care of God's earth. So the Quran confirms that whenever we lose this environmental equilibrium due to anthropogenically destructive activities, then the consequences of those actions will come back to us. It will come and bite us back later. So I think we need to reinforce. If we don't start now, then I'm so happy the other day when the Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim announced, a bigger budget for education. So I thought that through that, the subjects on civilization, on ethics, could perhaps be reinforced in our education system and curriculums.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Right, thank you, Dr. Husni, for sharing your
welcome.
thoughts on our topic today, ethical failures and man-made disasters. It is worth noting that from what you've said, man-made disasters can happen, but they can be avoided, they can be minimized, perhaps even mitigated by complying with religious, moral and ethical values. In this regards, I'd like to highlight a point raised by the renowned Islamic thinker Ismail al-Faruqi when he wrote that in man's usufruct and enjoyment of nature, man is enjoined to act morally and ethically. Any acts that go against moral and ethical values makes man unworthy as the vicegerent of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and therefore these acts are forbidden. Now, linking this to what we have discussed today, acts that go against the teaching of religion as well as ethical and moral values can also lead to disasters which otherwise could have been avoided. Thank you again, Dr. Muhammad Husni Muhammad Amin.
My pleasure, Dr. Sheikh.
He is fellow at the Center for Science and Environment Studies, IKIM. Thank you for joining me in this half an hour in our program Man and Nature. I'm sure that our discussion this week on ethical failures and man-made disasters has been very informative and also beneficial to our listeners, inshallah. And to our listeners of Radio IKIM, Man and Nature can be followed either on Radio IKIM or on IKIM FM's Facebook page. Please share and forward this discussion with everyone so that it can benefit everyone following this program, inshallah. Thank you again, Dr. Husni, for gracing to this program. That's all the time that we have for this week in this edition of Man and Nature. Next week, we will continue with our discussion on issues pertaining to disasters and climate change, but from another dimension, inshallah. To find out more, please stay tuned to next week's Man and Nature. Until we meet again, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.